Good morning. Thank you for joining me in this morning mindfulness practice. I want to talk about mindset. It's possible the answer is right in front of you. My mentor and coach, Bob Proctor, said, "Be open to receiving the good that you desire." Be open to receiving. Now, how often do we ask and pray and beg and want? We desire something so much, but rather than being grateful, we see the absence of it. We feel the missingness, the lack, the limitation. And part of the reason we don't receive what we want is because we're in an opposite vibration of what it feels like. That might sound a little woo-woo, but think about how you feel when you're happy, when you're so tied up in something that you love doing, whether it's with your family and friends or purposeful work, a leisure activity. You're so wrapped up in what you're doing and feeling so great, you don't even notice the time passing. Hours could pass by and it feels like minutes. You're just absorbed. I want you to think about something that you would love to have happen in your life, whether it's a trip, a relationship, deeply in love, or really knowing that you're here for a purpose and doing what makes your heart sing. Take a deep breath in and connect to that feeling. That's heart-brain coherence, when you're feeling as if you're already happy, joyful, purposeful. You're already in that state of being. You're open and grateful. Feeling totally cared for, calm, peaceful. Just grateful. Bob Proctor's son, Brian Proctor, wrote a book called My Father Knew the Secret, growing up with Bob Proctor. And he talks about mindset. And one of the chapters is, "It's possible the answer is right in front of you." Brian writes, "Many years ago, I lived in a small beach community just northwest of Vancouver, British Columbia. I lived on Howe Sound, and for me, it was magical. It was the first time I had ever lived on the West Coast. This way of living was new to me, and it resonated deeply with my soul. As a child, I was attracted to television shows about nature and have always had a passion for fishing and a deep love and connection to the water. Living this way was something I had dreamt about for as long as I can remember. I was embracing this opportunity. I found a beautiful home to rent for a year to get a feel for the area. The gentleman I rented the house from told me I could catch prawns right out front. He left me a trap 300 feet of rope and a buoy and a canoe so I could get started with paddling out and setting the trap. I made learning everything I could about catching prawns my first goal. How to bait the trap, the depth to place the trap, and so on. Unfortunately, my initial attempts didn't go well. I consistently set the traps too deep, and pulling them off the bottom was difficult while working to stay balanced in a canoe. Sometimes I would get 2 or 3 prawns, and other times the trap would be empty. A neighbor nearby frequently watched my efforts, and whenever he had the chance, he told me I was wasting my time. He insisted that prawns were no longer in the inlet. I persisted. A big part of why I continued was that my father trained me to follow my desire and stay focused on my goal. Knowing Dad would tell me to persist, I persisted. After a week or so, I landed on a few areas that started to produce. Sometimes I would pull the trap and find 20 or 30 prawns. To me, this was a win. After that, I started marking my locations and created a strategy. In no time at all, each day I was pulling up traps filled with prawns. This abundance allowed me to share with others and to also trade with salmon fishermen for their fresh fish. This lifestyle was very satisfying, and knowing I figured it out when others around me thought it was not possible made me proud of myself. A special memory I have from this time is the company of seals that seemed to show up from nowhere and stuck close when I paddled out into the quiet early mornings to check the traps. These curious marine mammals, frequently came in close to check what I was doing. There was always one seal in the group that was easy to identify from its unique markings of light skin and a specific pattern of spots on its face. It also had deep, dark, curious eyes. This seal enjoyed making eye contact. I could easily spot this one in the crowd. I named it Pup. This little seal would follow me and watch me closely as I pulled up the traps and dropped them back down. It really made for an enjoyable time when I was out on the water. I spoke softly to Pup and felt a friendly bond between us. It was a confusing time in my life, and this connection brought me peace. On one particularly miserable winter day after a storm, I went out when there was a break in the weather to check on the traps. The storms had kept me off the water for several days. The water was very choppy, so being in a canoe was tricky. I had to really focus on not tipping over. When I got to the first trap and started to pull it up, the wind picked up. It pushed the canoe adrift while I was still pulling. After I got the trap into the canoe and emptied it out, I put in fresh bait and then paddled back to where I thought my spot was to drop it. I had to work fast because the wind was gaining strength, the waves were getting bigger, and a bit of fog was rolling in. The conditions made it hard to judge the distance to shore. I sent the trap over the side and fed the rope out. When the rope reached its length, it usually would stop, but this time it kept feeding out. It was moving so quickly that it was impossible for me to grab and control it without tipping over. The entire 300 feet of rope went out and pulled the buoy, dragging it under the surface. Under the circumstances, there was nothing I could do. For safety, I had to get myself back to shore. The storm lasted several days, so all I could do was sit at my window and watch. I thought for sure I had lost the trap. After about a week, the skies cleared, so I rigged up a long pole with a hook on the end of it, figuring that I could paddle out and hopefully see the buoy submerged in the sunlight, and reach down to hook it and bring everything back up. I paddled around for over an hour without any sign of the buoy. I really felt turned around. I looked where I thought I had dropped it, and there was no sign of it. Pup was swimming alongside me the entire time and was the only seal to join me that day. I searched for over 2 hours and finally gave up. Pup left my side and swam out to deeper water as I began paddling back to shore. I could almost hear the seal barking out on the water when I was almost to shore. That was not unusual, but what was unusual was its behavior. The seal was swimming in fast circles. As I began pulling the canoe onto land, Pup began barking more rapidly and splashing while it swam in circles. I thought to myself, there is no way. However, I listened to my intuition and to that seal, and I thought, I need to be open to possible answers right in front of me. Jumping back in the canoe, I paddled my way out to where Pup was swimming in circles. It was much further out than I would ever go to drop the traps. However, the storm had played tricks on my sense of orientation. As I came closer to the seal, the water was clear and I could see the buoy. Pup was circling it with an exaggerated motion. The buoy was sitting about 6 feet under the surface. I got a hold of the traps with the pole I had rigged up and got everything back into the canoe. I thanked Pup both outwardly and inwardly. It was a moment with nature that I will never forget. That neighbor from a few doors down was out on his deck and witnessed it. He told me he had never seen anything like that in his life. From that day on, the locals called me the Seal Whisperer. I kind of like that. I often reflect on this experience and lesson with gratitude. I am grateful I persisted and that I allowed the possibility of something unexpected. Brian Proctor continues to write about his dad, Bob Proctor. He says, during my year in British Columbia, when Dad was doing back-to-back programs in BC, he and Gina came to see where I was living. I remember them both sitting on the deck in the sunshine. I made a nice dinner for the three of us. I was so happy to have them there. Although I know this way of living is not something my father would ever choose for himself, I appreciated how he supported me. He asked me questions that told me he was not only curious, but really had no idea why anyone would want to live so far out of the city. Dad used to say that he could live in a hotel. He loved hotels. The service, the amenities, the convenience. The way I was living was definitely not convenient, but he supported me despite not understanding it, and he was happy for me. So Brian asks us to consider, what does it mean to stay open to possibilities? Essentially, it is a willingness to keep an open mind, to listen to different ideas, different opinions, and thoughts, to consider other possibilities. Are you open to an answer that may be right in front of you? When you stay open to possibilities, you see opportunities, you gain fresh insights, and you will learn new things about yourself. Saying yes to new opportunities and ideas will grow your mind and feed your soul. Freedom comes when we stop being what other people think we should be, and we start acting like the person we want to be. Have you ever heard the saying that if you tell yourself a lie often enough, you will start to believe it? The basic premise is that your subconscious mind will accept whatever you impress upon it. Unlike your conscious mind can reject thoughts and ideas. Your subconscious is your emotional mind, and it only accepts the images you feed it with emotion and repetition. As far back as he can remember, Brian Proctor says his dad, Bob, would say, act as if you already are the person you want to become. He said it because he knew that if we learn to create from within, that the subconscious mind would not know the difference between fact and fiction. And if you acted like the person you want to become, you would eventually become that person. That holds true for everyone. And Bob Proctor used to say, what others think of you is none of your business. I was kind of taken aback by that. What do you mean it's none of my business? They're talking about me. It's my life. Of course, it's my business. But if you think about that, you can have an opinion of another person that is totally opposite of someone else who knows that person. We only know other people from our own point of view. Each person only knows us from their point of view, their paradigms, their way of looking at things. Your spouse knows you differently than your coworkers. Your children and your parents know you differently. Someone on your ball team or your golf foursome or your band or your favorite church, they all know you differently. It was Alfred Adler, the Austrian medical doctor, psychotherapist, and founder of the School of Individual Psychology, who first coined the phrase, act as if. It was in the 1920s, and Alfred Adler developed a strategy for his clients to practice roles that differed from their dysfunctional behaviors or their realities. And he called it role playing. Bob Proctor taught about using behavioral tools to improve reality. We often hear people mock the catchphrase, fake it until you make it, which comes from the idea of act as if. I get the cynicism because when used literally, the term can conjure up a sense of someone being a total imposter, trying to lie or cheat their way to success. But that's missing the point of the exercise. Acting as if is about changing your behavior to align with the person you are working to become. Changing your behavior first will change what you feel and how you think about yourself. Bob Proctor always had a love for finely tailored suits. Brian Proctor says back in the early 1960s, when Dad, Bob Proctor, first started his cleaning business, he scraped together his last few dollars to buy a wool suit. That was the one and only suit he had for his first few years in business. It was not high quality, so you can imagine how scratchy it would start to feel on his skin. He loved the look of it, but he got tired of how it felt. And more importantly, he got tired of the same look every day. Well, one day he heard an interview on the radio with someone famous. It came out that this person had over 20 custom tailored suits in his closet. That really shook Bob Proctor. He thought to himself, how wonderful would that be? Until that day, he had never heard of anyone with more than one or maybe two suits. Something in that interview changed Bob Proctor's perspective. He decided then and there that if he reached a specific target each month, he would go out and get himself a custom tailored suit. He honored that agreement he made with himself, and it wasn't long before he had a closet full of suits. In the beginning, he had to act like the person that deserved and could afford all those suits in his mind. But in no time, he became that person. You would be hard pressed to find him dressed in anything other than a suit. Wearing these well-made suits not only changed how he felt about himself, it changed the way he carried himself. I remember him telling me that wearing those new suits made him walk with purpose. He knew that the people around him started to see him differently too, and he liked that. Being dressed this way was a very important part of how Bob Proctor saw himself. And because he understood how dressing this way positively affected his self-image, he wanted others to have the same experience. So he began giving custom clothing as gifts and rewarding people that worked for him with custom suits or dresses. He continued that tradition right up to the end. Brian Proctor says, I grew up understanding that you cannot cherry pick which of the universal laws you will live by. They all apply, and you either live your life consciously following all of them or you don't. And if you don't, you will never experience growth in a way that serves your entire being. You may appear to be winning because one area of your life is giving off that appearance. But the truth is, if you are not living in alignment with all universal laws, you are not winning. Acting as if doesn't mean being phony or inauthentic. It's about changing behavior first. It is a step toward changing the way you see yourself. The goal is to change how you feel inside, and you will know you are on track when you feel that change. Feeling is the language of the subconscious. When Brian Proctor started a new career as a real estate salesperson in 1988, his dad, Bob Proctor, had two suggestions that Brian applied immediately. Number one, act as if I am the most successful real estate person ever. If I do, people will believe it. And more importantly, in time, I will believe it. And number two, only surround yourself with successful salespeople. That was some of the best advice, Brian says, I ever internalized. I made sure I started in an office with successful people, and I stuck closely to them, learning from them. I acted like I was selling a house every day, and I had been doing it forever. My very first clients would never have known that they were my very first ever real estate sale. The key was that I gave them service far superior to anything they had experienced so far. So in their eyes, I was the successful agent I acted like, and it didn't take long for my self-image to catch up. When I had close friends or family try to knock me down, I would just let their comments go without giving them energy. As Bob Proctor would say, they don't know any better. Just forgive them and keep going. So I stayed in character, and soon I was exactly who I was acting as. Brian Proctor says in his first year, he made it into the top 100 list for a major real estate company nationwide. For him, that was not an experience, an experiment. It was a way of life that he had been brought up with, and it has always worked. When you define the higher version of yourself you are reaching for, and you begin to live this exercise, you will stand taller, smile more broadly, move confidently, and in every respect, act as if you own it. Jim Rohn coined the phrase, "You are an average of the 5 people you spend the most time with." This is so true. Who are you surrounding yourself with? Decide that you will be the one to define who you are, not other people. When we give what we give attention to in our life grows. So be careful and purposeful about what you are focusing on. And always remember that negativity keeps company just as much as positivity does. You get to choose the company you want to keep. Keep in mind that to act as if when you are not already there is not always easy to do, because we all have friends and family who have their stories about who we are. To present them with a different version of us is uncomfortable. In fact, often when we try to be something different, those closest to us will be the first ones to try and bring us down. They do this because they feel threatened. They may not even realize what they are doing. And it's like Bob Proctor says, people do not resist change, they resist being changed. And when you present yourself differently to those close to you, you are making them uncomfortable. And you are shifting their world and creating change. This is the real test. When you enter this phase of judgment from those you love and are close to, how bad do you want this? When we feel judged, becomes a moment in time when we need to hold tight to our vision, act with confidence and determination to be that better version of ourselves, regardless. The ability to hold the vision and act as if, despite how it feels when the sharpness of others' opinions cuts deeply, is when you know you are aligning your behavior with your belief. Act as if you are already happy. Create a wonderful day. Thank you for joining me in this morning mindfulness practice. Enjoy your day. Act as if. And I'll see you back here tomorrow morning at 7. Thank you.